My name is Mark Walsh, and I've taught more coaches to work practically with the body than anyone else on the planet at this point. And in the next 20 minutes, I want to share 20 years of experience with you, really just to save you a bunch of time to learn some practical ways to work with the body. So if you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you're a coach, actually an experienced coach. So I've got lots of stuff out there for beginners. I mean, I wrote the book on this topic, working with the body in training and coaching. You can read that. I'm going to assume anyone listening to this has a reasonable coach training background and some experience. You don't need to be super experienced, but some experience. I'm not going to go through the basics of what coaching is or anything like that. I've worked with all kinds of organizations, coaching organizations like Newfield. Recently, I taught at Henley as a business school in the UK. I've taught multiple groups at the ICF groups, all over the planet at different universities, etc. And what I find is coaches know that the body is important. They know that it really matters, but they might not have the exact practical tools. They might not have the confidence with it. Like if someone's done an NLP, qualification, for example, the body's in there in the basic principles of NLP, but they'll be like, yeah, but what do I actually do with a client? Or maybe they're more kind of executive coach and they do a bit of yoga in the spare time. They understand that the body matters, but they go, how do I transfer that into a more sort of mainstream corporate coaching environment? So as I said, over the last 20 years, I've trained loads and loads of coaches in this. We had something called the Embodied Facilitator course in London and Moscow. That ran for nearly 10 years. I have a certificate online, certificate of embodiment coaching. Quick plug for that. If you really want training in this stuff, obviously it takes more than 20 minutes. Have a look at that. Yeah, as I said, been doing this for a while. It's been my love. It's been my passion. It's something I've massively geeked out about. But I'm aware people aren't as much of a geek as I am. And they go, okay, what have you learned? Just sort of give us some basics. So I've broken this down into 10 different things. Then for 11 at the end, I've got mistakes to avoid. So what are some, I mark a lot of exams on for my courses and observe a lot of coaches. And there's some classic mistakes to avoid we'll cover at the end. At the end, I'm also going to talk about trauma. So that's quite interesting. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so 10 points. I think one would be to have a clear definition of what embodiment is. Particularly now it's something of a buzzword, right? Something of a buzzword. I I feel like people are using it like kind of mindfulness has happened. Sometimes I say it's the subjective study of the body, for example. Sometimes I say it's, a body of work. For those who are watching on YouTube, I'll share some slides here and you can kind of have a look at that. So it's more than just a nonsense definition. There's a real academic definition. Sometimes I say it's a type of intelligence. I have a model of that's in my book. We go through the 8 types of embodied intelligence. Yeah, in terms of field of study, there's different areas it comes from, yoga, martial arts, theater, conscious dance, etc. Again, no one's an expert in all these things. I'm interested in how do they apply to coaching. I started off in Aikido, martial arts, which is wonderful. I was doing psychology at the time. How do those things fit together? But then I realized, there was a much broader field of study. And I'd say that should be number one, to have a clear definition of it. Yeah, the body is I, not it, how we live as bodies, the subjective experience of the body. Simple definition, how we are. Okay, so the manner of our relational ontology, to use big words. Clear definition, number one. Second thing I'd say, I've learned the hard way over the years is avoid new age or hippie language. So particularly if you're working with mainstream groups, as I have, I've started a trauma charity in Ukraine. I've worked with big business. I even taught at the House of Lords briefly. You need to use language that people understand. So having a clear aim is part of that. That's something mistake I see a lot of coaches not doing with embodied work. If they come from, say, a yoga, dance, martial arts background, or coaches have been influenced by that, they might have adopted, energy and chakras or kind of Asian words, from Aikido or whatever. I think this is very unhelpful. And actually using down to earth language is super helpful. Sometimes you'll hear like sort of authority claims with using more anatomical language or more spiritual, say Buddhist language, or neuroscience even, sort of trying to confuse people with science or impress people with it. So, oh, that's an amygdala hijack. You don't need to do that. So number two is just speak clearly. That's the thing I'd say. It's absolutely unnecessary to have a lot of jargon. Okay, third thing I've learned in the 20 years working with embodiment coaching, self-awareness is absolutely key. So two levels of this that coaches need. One is sensory self-awareness, i.e. mindfulness, sustained mindfulness, being aware of the most of the body consistently, i.e. most of the time in more detail. Yeah. Some kinds of ways of training meditation and mindfulness will do that. Some won't. Got a book on meditation if you're interested. Yes, that's one level of self-awareness, is being able to like track yourself. So important when you're teaching embodiment, when you're coaching with embodiment. And the other level of self-awareness you won't get to through mindfulness. Actually, that's your embodied patterns. So, one way of looking at embodiment is a set of characteristics, a set of habits that we embody that are there in our system, in our posture, breath, movement, etc. Most people aren't aware of those, and you will need feedback from those. There's ways I do that with people in workshops, on training courses like Keck. You will need that because that's the lens you're seeing everyone else's embodiment through, right? Like I'm fairly fast as a person. I'm aware of that. If I'm not aware of that, if I because to me it just feels normal, right? If I'm not aware of that, not only will I go too quickly for a lot of my students, particularly those that speak other languages, but also someone who's sort of normal speed will seem slow, right? And someone who's fast will seem normal. It's the embodiment is a perceptual lens. It's a way of thinking and seeing as well as just something. It's not just something you carry around. So number three, self-awareness, absolutely vital. All right. Next one, you need your own practices. So for me, this is absolutely key. Yes, you could do a 6-month qualification with us. You could do a 2-year qualification, maybe somewhere else. It's great, but you need your own practices. You can't get this from a YouTube video alone or from a book. My book's great. It's got all techniques in, whatever. It's useful. But it's textbook. It's like trying to learn kissing from a book or something, driving from a book, right? That's ridiculous. Embodiment is a set of skills as much as anything, and those skills take practice. Also, you need to embody range. So some people have a very soft embodiment, a very hard embodiment, and you need the whole spectrum of yin and yang, or sometimes we use 4 elements as a model as a coach. And if a coach doesn't have that range, they'll get in trouble. They'll only be able to work with in a certain kind of way with certain kinds of students. This is so helpful. I've got many competitors who I love and respect, but I saw one years ago, wrote a book on embodied leadership. And as far as I can tell, had no personal practice, not dance, not yoga, not martial arts, nothing. How is this possible? This person is writing books. It's like virgins talking about, the best way to make love. So, yeah, number 4, definitely embodied practice. So helpful. Okay. Where are we at? Centering. Oh, quick win. By the way, lots of demos online if you want to see me on YouTube, for example. So many demos. On Instagram, we do 1-minute demos. People say, how do you do 1-minute demos? It's like, it's just showing a certain degree of ease having done this for 20 years, right? You can see the examples, but often what you'll see in coaching demos is centering. So what do I mean by that? So I don't use jargon like I told you not to. Self-regulation techniques. They're helping people get it together, helping people regulate themselves. Think of the average coaching session. I don't know about you, but someone comes, they're stressed out, they're busy. People are just getting busier, it seems, in the world today. If they're not stressed already from their life, which most people are, as soon as they arrive, they'll start speaking about something that's a problem, because otherwise, why would they be paying you for coaching? It's the problem they have, they want solving. That in itself is stressful. The problem with that is it shuts down their creativity. If we're in that fight flight response, we're not going to be in our most intelligent, most compassionate, most creative way of being. So centering is any simple technique, relax the belly, feel the feet on the ground, take a breath. Yes, you can fine tune that with skill as a coach as you learn more different, different techniques from yoga or Aikido or whatever. But even just some very basic ways to regulate people, co-regulation, of course, but also helping them self-regulate. So useful. And you just get better coaching questions. I know if coaches listening to this agree, tell me in the comments if you agree or disagree, but I've found the quality of the coaching question, it determines a lot of the success of the coaching. And if people are stressed, they'll give a low quality question like, why is my boss an idiot? As opposed to if they're a bit less stressed, you do the self-regulation with them. How can I communicate more effectively with my boss? It's just more constructive, it's kinder, it's more ethical in that sense. It's just more likely to get a result. So it's the first thing I teach coaches in all my courses is like how to do centering before you go into, even if you just then went into regular coaching. Yeah, so I worked with a large coaching organization, I don't know, 10 years ago at least now. And I just taught that because they gave me like 2 or 3 hours. I said, all right, let's just do this. I haven't got time for all the complex stuff. Let's just do centering. And they were like, wow, this is an upgrade. I remember one coach saying to me, I do it now in 4 sessions what I used to do in 8. Yeah, he made a joke about it actually. He said it cost me money. So I thought it was funny. But ultimately we do want to be more efficient, right? So centering, other self-regulation techniques that exist. There's loads of videos of mine on there online, and podcasts on this, etc. They're such a helpful part of coaching. I just don't understand why coaches and also therapists, I don't understand why they don't do that as standard. For me, it's just bonkers to let people run in this kind of stressed way. And I guess they don't really have, most coaches don't have that. They're not that tuned in to what the state of what a person is. Often coaches are listening to the words because words are seductive, right? But actually, it doesn't really matter what someone says. We know this. I do an exercise in my workshop. So I touch my elbows. And as I touch my elbows, I say, touch your knees. So I touch my elbows while saying, touch my knees. And everybody touches their elbows. No one listens to the words, really. They listen to the body. So, yeah, the state is so important. And we need to be able to shift that, not just be mindful of it, but shift it. All right. Next thing I'd say I've learned over the years in terms of what makes a good embodiment coach is just practice a lot. Yeah, it sounds dumb, but like if you're a beginner listening to this, just get a load of practice. Like offer your coaching in exchange for feedback, in exchange for introductions, in exchange to film it. Some sort of an exchange is useful to so people bring value it, but do as much as you can. Now, I've been very lucky over the years. I've just had the ability to do the circumstances to do a lot of coaching, and face to face is much better for learning. So I do a lot of embodied coaching on the phone, listening to the breath, on Zoom a lot these days, totally normal now. But originally, like back in the day, that was less of an option. Back in the day, it was much more face to face coaching before video conferencing. And equally, just like I travel a lot for work, so I do a lot of coaching on or around workshops when I'm there, coaching and mentoring. And the face-to-face feedback is like the best feedback loop. It's like so where you'll see what's working and what's not. A lot of embodied coaching is learning calibration, we could call it. It's like what's too much, what's too little, tuning into people. You can't learn that from a book. It's like, again, let's take kissing as our fun example again. You have to know when's the right time to kiss someone, how much pressure do you apply, how much you open your mouth. It's the same with coaching, right? Don't kiss your coaches, but you get the idea. The principle here is embodied coaching is learned as a skill. So you do need that feedback loop. So as much practice as possible. I've also found with different types of people. So there was a point in my career where I would train, I'd say, okay, chefs, great. All right, nurses the next day, all right, single mums the next day, lawyers the next day. I train with all different types of people. I take any invitation that I was given, no matter what the money, if it was a different type group of people, because I wanted to see what was universal. I wanted to see what worked with everyone rather than just being stuck in one mode. Kind of brings us on to point 7 is being culturally aware. So cultural awareness is a key one. Like so much of embodiment is cultural. There is a universal stuff like the fight or flight, like human stuff. Actually even animals have that, right? But there's human stuff. And again, the more countries you train in, the more you'll see that. So I've taught in over 50 countries at this point. Almost every country in Europe, actually. I spoke to some priests, Ukrainian priests in the Vatican City this year. And I was like, oh, if I teach in the Vatican, that's 51. It's kind of getting it hard to find new countries at this point. I think Albania, Liechtenstein, I saw the other day. I was just next to Liechtenstein. Anyway, so cultural embodiment. No offense to my American colleagues, but the North Americans tend to be not so good on this. I think it's because of the American individualism, melting pot idea, and just that it's less easy to travel. I've got I don't know if you're a student. I've got a student in Luxembourg, for example. She can be in like 5 countries in an hour. So if you live in Europe and train a lot in Europe, I think also teaching in Russia was very seminal for me. I can't teach there now because of the war, because I'm very Ukraine aligned. But for many years, I go to Russia several times a year, and I do the same content in London, and then the same content in Russia, and some things just didn't work well. So I think with everyone traveling around and the international nature of most big businesses, this is so important. It's so important to understand cultural variables. Okay. Yeah. So this is another principle I've come up with, which is PPP. So people, places, practices. I think a lot of coaches think it's all about the technique. right? But actually, it's the people doing the technique and the place they're in. So embodiment is defined, or at least influenced, as much by this cultural piece, the relational aspect, and even just where people are. Doing embodied coaching, sitting by the lake, is very different than doing it 15 floors up in a steel, high-rise office. So the influence of place, environment, how do you use that? So you can use that skillfully as a coach, right? You can sit people by the lake to help them calm down. Sometimes I have us look at with a client and be walking, and I'll say, look up at the trees. I mean, even walking coaching, right? Getting them out from where they normally are, understanding that different postures lead to different types of coaching, essentially, right? All right. I hope you're enjoying this. By the way, if you haven't given us a review on iTunes, if you're listening on the podcast, please do. That really helps us out. And on YouTube, what would be helpful, just leave a comment, like ask a question or say what has been helpful for you. It's good feedback and also, it helps appease the algo gods. All right. Next one, what are we up to? 9, almost there, almost there. Rhythm. So important. So this is easy to sound trite if you say, oh, you should have good rhythm. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and end. Every coaching session does too. And that's a felt thing. It's not like 5 minutes to establish the relationship, 10 minutes to go into depth, 5 minutes to do the practical application. Should always do that with embodiment, not just stay in the depths. That isn't a time thing. That's a felt thing. This is a sensitivity to rhythm, which we are creatures of rhythm. We live in the rhythms of our lives and the seasons. Females have their cycles, and this is so important, right? As a man, for example, I've got colleagues who work with, female cycles. It's so important to embodiment coaching, and just learning even a little bit about that is incredibly helpful. Understanding lifespans is another, right? We act as if, I'm middle-aged now. Being middle-aged is not the same as when I was a 20-year-old, young, up and coming, coach who was going to be, I was 20 years old when I graduated and started getting into this stuff. Shit, it's 25 years, not 20 years. My God. Okay. So the rhythm one is just a massive thing, I'd say, that I've learned. And every year I see, how can I put, like a different level of depth with that every single year. So yeah, yeah, vital stuff. Okay, 10. Before I go to mistakes, I'll finish off with the mistakes to avoid. Number 10, trauma. So a little bit to say about this because a lot of the way into embodiment for a lot of people now is trauma. Trauma's become very fashionable. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, is his embodiment book. I saw someone reading that on the train the other day. I was like, wow, yeah, this is everywhere now. Not a coach or anyone, just a regular civilian. Unfortunately, the trauma world, I'm kind of hipster about this. I was into trauma before it was cool. One of my main teachers, Paul Linden, was very trauma aware. Stacey Haynes used to work with Richard Strozzi Heckler, just credit to him as another sort of seminal name in this field. It's very trauma aware. I should also mention Wendy Palmer, Stuart Heller. These are all OGs in this kind of field. Like most of them are deceased or retiring, and say at this point, but all worth crediting. Um, yeah, but trauma awareness is kind of in the time I've been involved in this field has really come up, and that's great because the trauma and the body interact, right? Trauma can shut down the body, for example. Trauma can lead to a hyperaroused bodies. Numb bodies can lead to, different triggers around the body. The body is not a safe space for everyone. And what fortunately is what's happened, instead of being trauma informed, people have become a bit trauma deformed. It's become a sort of oversensitivity. And I see that mistake as we go into mistakes. I'll probably mention it again, but being scared to work with the body, thinking, oh, I can't do that. It's for therapists, anyone who touches the body. Well, you are working with the body. You always are. The body's always present. Wherever you go, there you are, is a nice phrase. And I think being trauma aware is helpful, being trauma enhanced, using your understanding of trauma to be more sensitive, to be more tuned in, to be more compassionate, certainly. Very useful for coaches. But not taking on some of this sort of far left, very American woke ideology around trauma. I think it's just alienating to a lot of people. And frankly, it's unhelpful for coaches. It's unhelpful to be worried the whole time around this, trying to treat everyone with kid gloves is so unhelpful. and certainly to demand clients take on a political ideology that's really quite extreme. Actually, I think it's just not gonna. I don't know if we're working with the Ukrainian military or lawyers in London, it's just not going to go down well. So yeah, I'd say beware of that. Okay, let's look at mistakes. I'm going to put a slide up for those in the podcast below. I've shared a few slides, not very many, but a few. You know what? I'll share a couple from things I've talked about before we do mistakes. So centering is a centering technique we use a lot called ABC centering. Just a little bit on that. Looking at stress responses, in terms of working with centering, that's so helpful. So just come back to that for the coaches. But yeah, nice quote from Aristotle: "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is a not is a habit. Actually, it's not Aristotle that quote originally, but it's often attributed to him. Okay, mistakes. So I'd say the first mistake is just not working with the body at all, right? Like pretending the body doesn't exist when actually the body always exists and is always affecting our coaching. So let's work with it skillfully. In terms of other reasons to work with the body, I'd say it's often where the most impact is. Um, yeah, it's often where the most impact is because that's the bit that sort of smart people often aren't using. Well, our culture's kind of blind to it, so you get a lot of leverage from there. And if you want to make things stick, you need to work with the body and practices. Cognitive knowledge is not enough. Or else, I sometimes joke, Wikipedia will have solved all the world's problems, right? You pick up my phone, there's all the information in the world, but that doesn't make you wise. So not working with the body at all is a mistake. Being too hippie or new age, I mentioned the language used, but it's also about your own embodiment, how you dress, your own, all sorts of things. Using the yoga voice, that is definitely a mistake. Don't make it weird. So I'd say to coaches out there, if you're just kind of matter of fact about it, you can be quite straightforward. What do you do in your body when that happens, John? What do you notice? You're tightening up your belly. What's going on with your breathing? Just don't make it weird. I think that's a huge mistake to avoid. Being too scared of the body, particularly in terms of it's a mistake to not be trauma informed. That's number 5 on my list here. But being trauma deformed, right, or being scared, oh, the body's kind of weird, or some people are sort of embarrassed by the body. It has this association, oh, it's like sex or something. It's just the body, guys. It's just the body. So yeah, not making it weird, not being scared to work with it. I'd say another mistake is like using too complex tools. So for example, there's things like Feldenkrais, embodied practices out there that are really complex and awesome and beautiful, Alexander technique. But sometimes you just say to people like, notice your posture. Bring a bit of awareness to people. Notice your posture. We actually have postures for different things. I find that's very helpful. We have a whole system called Embodied Toolkit, and like a self-care pose and a boundaries pose. I think it's very useful to have a language of the body. But just pointing people to what they're already doing is so helpful. So helpful. Okay, I think we're about there. So that was top 10 things plus a few mistakes to avoid. This has been a pretty brief run through. Obviously, if you want to get trained with us, cheapest way to do it, buy the Body and Training and Coaching, this book. Okay, very easy to find, Amazon, etc. Loads of demos. Talking about embodied coaching is missing the process. And I find observation, mentoring, looking at demos to take on almost implicitly what's going on. That's a great way to learn. So look at YouTube and Instagram and Facebook for those. There's some here on the podcast if you're just listening on the podcast. If you're not listening on the podcast, the Embodiment Podcast. And as I said, if you want to train with a certificate of embodiment coaching, Google that or go to embodimentunlimited.com. It's normally linked on there. We start every year, usually in February, 6-month course, very well organized, not prohibitively expensive, and a really great place to start. And if you're already an experienced coach, you're just going to lap it up like people every year. The vast majority of people who start that course finish it, and particularly the coaches say, yeah, this is great, getting a lot from it. And we teach like 6 practical techniques on that, as well as much more depth than all the theory I've done today. Okay, so 20 years and 20 minutes. Hope that was helpful.